Folks, welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and we're here for the first episode of the Camp Notes series for 2024. Today, the opening day of Ravens training camp, and a short practice on hand, a hot day. Fans were out there in droves. You get to see a lot of the people you haven't seen in a while, but interesting stuff. To make best use of the time, and it was a shorter practice today, they had two fields of 11-on-11 play going, so they get as much as they can out of a shorter session, but you keep your guys busy. There's the big news was no Lamar Jackson today, a sickness that apparently came on yesterday. John Harbaugh addressed it during the interview. I don't know anything more about it than that, but Josh Johnson ended up getting most of the reps with a trickle-down effect for Devin Leary, the third-string quarterback, and Emory Jones, the last guy. We'll call him a camp arm, but he's there in camp, obviously trying to make an impression. Passing in this day was not particularly crisp, as one might expect, with an absence of Lamar Jackson. There was just one long reception on the main field. It was a mid-range reception on a ball falling out of bounds that was pretty nice by Isaiah Likely, but a long reception on the right sideline by Dayton Wade, who beat Bump Mitchell on the play. Bump Cooper on the play. And that one was called back for a holding call. Did not see who got that holding call, but it was either Jones or Rosengarten on the play. 70 and 74 were the two that were in question there. I showed up at practice. The very first thing I got a chance to watch was the offensive line, and I always love that when the offensive line, in particular, when they're proximal to the area where I can stand and view. So I could hear what Dallas Sanders was saying, and it's very technical, and it's the offensive line is in good hands with Coach Joe. It's a really, they're far along. It looks like much further than I would have thought for having a completely new offensive line, but it looks like at least at the snap, people are leaving in sync. Maybe they just have very similar reflexes and whatnot, but I like to see it when they're up quickly. They were running somewhere between 3/4 and full speed in terms of their off the ball movements here. Now they are running against opponents who are other offensive linemen just carrying a pad. So that is, needless to say, not the same as trying to face a penetrating defensive tackle opposite you. So they always say that no plan survives the enemy, but contact with the enemy. But in this case, I think that at least in terms of what they're trying to learn, in terms of the fundamentals and whatnot, it looks like they're further along than I would have really expected. Nobody really looked like sluggish or like they were having problems with basics. I'll have more to say about the offensive line in a few minutes. I want to get through some macro level points by do it, but we will come back to that because there were a lot of really interesting things I thought about this coaching session that I got a chance to watch. One thing about the actual 11-on-11 drills, I can't talk about exactly who was on the field in terms of the combination, who was playing with first team, second team, et cetera. I will say they're still doing a lot of different rotations through options. So one of the things Harbaugh said during OTAs was that he hoped that they would have all that worked out by training camp. I don't think he met that goal. I think just seeing today what went on, I think they're still moving people around a fair amount, and we'll see this develop, and we'll get our best first look at it during that first preseason game, seeing who sits out, which is tremendous information about who's likely to be a starter, and who also is in there for the first few series, and what's the order of entry and departure. Very important things to look at, not just the level of play of each of the players. So one particular position where they did a lot of exchange was at center. Had at least 6 different players take snaps at center during practice day. It was probably more because I was only watching one of the 11-on-11 fields, and there were other centers on the other field. For instance, Nick Samac was not on the field that I was watching, but I'm sure, I guarantee you, he was taking snaps at center since he's one of the primaries, and he probably would have been on the other field taking most of the snaps at center. But they also had a number of other players, and the Ravens are just, in this case, it's not that they expect any of these guys to play center. They just want to be able to get through a football game if they lose a center or even 2, and they may be in a position where Nick Samac won't be active for game day, and they would need to get through that game with somebody else. Maybe they have the luxury of being Patrick McCary, who's played a fair amount at center over the years, or maybe they don't have that luxury because they need McCary at tackle and they need to have somebody else step in. So they had other people taking snaps today. I'm sure somebody will report it. I'm not going to do it and break the rules, but I'll just say the Ravens had a number of different players. Almost every interior offensive lineman, I would say, had a snap at center today. So that was something to see. Did a lot of special teams work. Now I had hoped that they would be doing the kickoff drill today, but they weren't. They did punt drills today, where the heavy special teams thing. They're still in kind of a build-up mode. So, particularly under Jerry Rosburg, they used to have a build-up where they literally moved from half line to full line to really get release elements correct. What I saw today was mostly full line punt release drills. So it's basically you snap the football. You don't kick a football. You just have a go signal or a timing of how long you have to hold your block before you go. And then they want to see that both the players on the return team and the players on the punt team are releasing correctly or holding their blocks long enough, et cetera, that they know what their blocking assignment is, for example. All that's very important. But they, it's a build-up drill. They're still not at the point where they're trying to cover somebody who's returning a kick. So, you only have so much time to get through in special teams, and you want to teach it a piece at a time, try and hopefully it gets retained. And, they're in that process right now on the first day of camp. One piece of very good news, David Ojabo, who was on the field and in sweats. And there was talk, I believe, from Harbaugh during OTAs or anyway prior to this, that David Ojabo might not be back playing in team drills until the middle of training camp. But he was out there today, and even though he was wearing sweats, so I guess he must have done some practice on his own, felt good enough to go, and then just jumped right in there on 11 on 11s and was present. And I can't say he had any great pressures or anything like that, but just the fact that he was present there is a good thing, and much sooner, obviously, than it's expected. And the Ravens, to bring you up to date, if you don't know this, Adisa Isaac is currently on the NFI list. So don't know how long that's going to last, but it's been kind of a persistent hamstring injury of unknown severity. To put him on the NFI list, the Ravens may be trying to send a message. They may be trying to save money or take advantage of a 90-man roster limit or something that he doesn't count against. There may be reasons why they're doing it, but they're attempting to. They have him on NFI, which is a designation you do not want to be on as a player because you don't get paid, or you don't have to be paid anyway. A team might pay you out of the goodness of their own heart, but they don't have to pay you. So we know that David Ojabo, the last player we talked about, spent about half of his first season on NFI. The Ravens now, in hindsight, wish probably that he'd spent the whole season on NFI, so they didn't waste his year with the Ravens, but that's water under the bridge. But Andrew Voorhees last year did spend the whole year on NFI, and he enters this year as a year one player. So he's in the first of 4 seasons. So the degree he stands a good chance to, I think, be a starting offensive lineman. He's a guy the Ravens will have for 4 years, and that's good news. A general theme for the offensive skill position players really came out in the interviews of both Flowers and Bateman. So you had Harbaugh, Bateman, Flowers were the 3 guys at the podium today. And, there's just not too much to draw from what Bateman and Flowers say, other than they both seem to be very excited about the prospects of having Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson in the backfield and what pressure that will take off the receiving group. So, the interviews are out there. You can feel free to listen and draw your own conclusions from what they're saying. And not one thing about the day that was going on was that Derrick Henry and Zay Flowers both signed autographs for a very long time after practice. Derrick Henry, I can't even tell you how many minutes he was out there, but Zay Flowers was the last to the podium, and he signed autographs all the way from the end of practice until he got called to the podium. So that's a long day. And he talked about, having a particular incident in his own youth where he wanted to take a picture with a pro player. They wouldn't do it. He wasn't going to name names, but he wanted to make sure that he didn't, have that experience with anybody else, young fan that would have been there. Very funny autograph moment. So about 20 or 30 minutes before the end of practice, they announce that it's time to line up for autographs. Okay. So they say, if you'd like to get an autographs, please line up by the far bleachers or whatever. I didn't actually catch the entire exact thing, but I'll paraphrase it like that. And then they said the funny part, which was, and please walk, over that. And I could think, it's not been that long since I've been a kid, at least in my own mind, even though I'm 61 years old. There's no way in hell. If somebody tells me, please walk to the line for autographs, then I'm walking. I'm running. So anyway, that was actually kind of funny to hear a completely futile instruction for children. And I think the parents were understanding that too and were moving very quickly in terms of wanting to get in that autograph line. Absent from practice today, Keaton Mitchell and TJ Tampa, they're both on the PUP list. Lamar sick, as I mentioned earlier. Adisa Isaac still on NFI. Everybody else was there, so that's really good news. There was one I was not able to confirm. I did not see Evandy Rigby, but I'm pretty sure he would have been on the field of number 2s, on the second field of 11 on 11s. I think he was there, but I did not confirm that myself. You probably heard Eddie Jackson has been signed by now. Eddie Jackson was there for this first practice. Jordan Tolles apparently has been cut to make room for Eddie Jackson. It's never good when you have two numbers that are the same on the roster, because usually pretty good indication who got cut. But the Ravens have two number 39s on their roster today, and my understanding is Jordan Tolles has been cut to make room for Eddie. Let's go back to the offensive line for a little bit, because I wanted to talk about some of that. I was very impressed with Coach D and what he does, but there's not that loss of continuity that the team should have, or not. It's not obvious anyway yet in terms of having three new offensive linemen, or frankly, in the drills, it can be more than that. They're already moving from half line to full line drills to practice zone concepts, for example. I don't think I'm giving anything away there, because every team obviously practices zone concepts, but they look good doing it, and they look like they're doing them more or less at full speed on the first day of practice, which is a nice thing to see, as opposed to, hey, we're just learning here again, and there's been this brain drain over our period of non-play and whatnot, but it's nothing like that. And they appear to be moving not quite at full speed, though pretty darn close to it, between 3/4 and full speed versus the linemen with pads. They did a few practice penetrations. That's obviously where the rubber hits the road in terms of offensive line play. Is their plan going to survive contact with the enemy? And we'll see how that goes. One of the nice things to see is how Coach D teaches offensive line play, very much about hand placement, about feet and where you go, and the transfer of weight effectively, I'll say, on things like a reach block, for example. So he's really in this practice, he was teaching the players how to get on a zone block and reach, and then use their inside arm, sorry, I guess it would be their outside arm, their left arm on a zone run right, for example, to lift and effectively block that player where they have to get to. And a reach block, for those who don't know, is a block where you have to find a player before he can get to a hole that is in front of you on the play side of the thing. It's a cutoff block if it's the backside of the play. Anyway, that was going on, and they're working against guys in pads, obviously, again, but you see a lot of very specific, very technical coaching about lifting and leaning back and whatnot, and how you rip through that move, and it's very good to see that. One of the things that came to mind with me was how fortunate the situation is for some distressed properties on the offensive line. Last year, John Simpson. This year, Josh Jones is in a similar category, who've had problems with other teams, not been particularly good players, frankly. And they come here, and all of a sudden they're turned into better offensive linemen. In Simpson's case, still had a big penalty problem with the Ravens. I wouldn't claim that his season was particularly great last year, and the penalties were the main reason it wasn't particularly great last year. I thought he had a pretty good year as a pass blocker, honestly, but the penalties were not great. But they've taken another chance with Josh Jones, who is a guy with 36% more penalties per snap than Simpson had. So that's career. it's just nice that the Ravens are in a position, both in terms of depth and in position of trusting their coaches, to be able to take chances like that on some distressed properties. And Bill James used to have a really good thing in the Baseball Abstract he would put in some years, which is like, what marginal characteristics are most valuable in this ballpark? And that's what the Ravens kind of got to be looking at. If you want to get players cheap, it's how can the marginal characteristics help you? Eddie Jackson might be a complete evidence, archetype of getting marginalizing the weaknesses of a player, we're saying, and using his strengths to get the most out of him. He's a player who's not played well for the last 4 years combined. He's been in a tough situation. Sure, they may have been asking him to do more than he had done. He was capable of by his current physical status and reductions in speed and decline in play and whatnot. But the truth of the matter is, he's just not a single high free safety anymore. By switching him into a split field role, maybe you get more out of his instincts. Maybe his tackling is not as much of an issue. If he's got a more closely defined set of the field that he's responsible for. But I think mostly, in terms of coverage, you have a chance to get something, get some useful play out of a player like that, which will still allow you to use Kyle Hamilton in the ways you'd like to have the Ravens' probably best defensive player of the year candidate have a chance to have the greatest season he can possibly have. What else do I have to say? Some nice exchanges between Stanley and Voorhees. So nice to see him stepping in and talking to Andrew and trying to give him some advice. So I like that anytime I see it. I'm not as excited about hearing kind of wisecracky remarks, which happen between linemen, which may be negatively about a player or even about the coach. And I didn't really hear any of that today. So it's good that that's happening. And it's always nice to see any player who says, hey, try and put your foot here or try and do this first. Make sure you line up this way. That's always good to see. Always good to see a veteran taking care of a lineman there. I thought Voorhees himself was fairly quick off the snap. The one guy who looked a little bit slow was Christian Dalcourt. And I may be picking on him, maybe unfairly, but he's the one guy I noticed that was off the snap a little bit slow. Voorhees seemed to be just fine. They did some drills where he had to make it up to level 2 because there's a guard bubble over him, meaning there's no immediate blocker. They don't really practice the double teams on a pad guy, or at least they did not in this practice. So it's just usually running up to level 2 and hitting the padded linebacker at that level. And I thought Voorhees did a good job of getting in position quickly. As I don't know how much you can really tell about that when it's not a live rep against somebody who's actively trying to evade him. But he looked good in terms of the quickness getting there. Got some additional thoughts. These really move to a micro level, and some stuff that's kind of funny and stuff that's kind of sad in the same way. But Josh Jones had 2 false starts during 11-on-11 drills, and he had to run a lap each time. And of course, Josh Jones is the guy coming to the Ravens with a bunch of big penalty problems. It's interesting because he may have been the guy called for holding as well that called back the long pass. It was either him or Rosengarten, but they have laps for pre-snap fouls. But I didn't see anybody running a lap after that holding call. So apparently it's not thought to be as serious a problem to have a serious post-snap foul like that, even though you heard me say many times, no doubt, that post-snap foul is much more serious than pre-snap fouls in terms of their cost to the offense, not only because of the yardage and difference between a holding and a false start, for example, but even in terms of 5-yard penalties, you give the defense the option to take the result of the play, which often has tremendous value if the play doesn't work out, incomplete, interception, or whatever it might be. All right. That one big pass play was a completion to Dayton Wade, who was covered by Bump Cooper. Great name for a cornerback, of course, from the bump and run days. But Dayton Wade, a guy who I know that at least one guy in the Baltimore area has very high hopes for in terms of him being a receiver. So nice to see him make the big play during the day. Josh Ross had a nice pass breakup. And yes, I do know his name is Josh Ross and not Joe Ross or Joss Ross. And I apologize to the Ross family, as well as all other Ravens fans who've seen that, no doubt, on the graphics or on the title of the Expectations pod that included him. Tylan Wallace had a nice contested catch versus JAD, kind of good scrap for the ball. They don't fight each other too hard at this point in play, but this was a good. Tylan Wallace wanted it more. JAD wasn't doing more than he did, and Tylan made a nice catch on the play. One guy who had a big practice, Marlon Humphrey. Outstanding positional play, was very fine along the sidelines. I thought he was good in taking away space downhill, whether it was on 7-on-7s or 11-on-11. Looks to me like Marlon Humphrey is in absolutely outstanding shape. I kind of remember him from last year as being a little thicker and a little slower. This year, I would say he looks lean and fast. And that is a big change, because I'm sure Marlon Humphrey will still be a physical player, even if he's lost a little bit of weight. So we've seen that with a couple of key players here. Lamar Jackson, we know, lost some weight this offseason and looks probably much more able to run the football and hopefully won't take a bunch of big hits in the passing game or the run game for that matter. But we see a guy who's ready for camp in terms of being in shape. A few other things. Brent Urban batted down a pass at the line of scrimmage, so that was nice. Justice Hill, really good explosion. There's a well-blocked run play to the right. He exploded through the hole, and the running backs don't get a lot of touches during camp. They touch the ball maybe 2-3 times in practice among a bunch of run plays and whatnot. If you're Derrick Henry, you get more, but Justice Hill, and the other running backs typically follow up on their runs and run 30, 40, 50 yards each time they get to touch the football. Derrick Henry probably is an exception to that. I don't see him typically running those out play after play because he's getting many more of them. I mentioned Devin Leary got a few trickle-down snaps at quarterback. He did have a fumble exchange with a running back. I did not see who it was. Owen Wright had a pretty nice day. Looks to be moving pretty well. And he was a guy who spent the entire year on the practice squad last year. Definitely a guy who might get an opportunity. And there's always attrition. Running back is a position where there can be attrition, and you can be activated as a third back for a game fairly easily, particularly if someone is just missing a game with some sort of soft tissue injury. So him staying ready is definitely a good thing. Keaton Mitchell still on PUP, probably will be back, I would think, second half of the season, if at all, in 24. So Owen Wright's got a window here where he might have an opportunity to run the football a little bit for the Ravens, and we'll see how that works out. Isaiah Likely made a nice catch, kind of falling out of bounds along the left sideline. It was one of the few nicely squared up on target throws. The pass was defended. Likely used his body a little bit to box out the defender, and he kind of fell out of bounds to make sure he kept his feet in bounds. Wasn't falling out to the side. He's actually falling out backwards with the ball, so looked good doing it. The one guy who had an up and down game was Malik Cunningham. So he had a nice catch on a crossing route. I saw early, seemed to have a fair number of targets in this practice. But he did also tip a ball that was intercepted by Arthur Maulette. And that was the one interception that I was sure of on the day for the Ravens defenders. So given the fact they're playing a lot of 11-on-11 and not 7-on-7, you would think there might be a couple more balls, particularly with Jackson missing, that might be tipped and intercepted. Zay Flowers did tip one ball up. It fell harmlessly, but it certainly was an interceptable ball in terms of the trajectory of the tip, potentially causing problems in a real game. But it was it fell, and the defense. I think they had a good game. I think they had a good game positionally. I don't think they gave up a lot of big pass plays, but they didn't have a lot of interceptions either. And so pretty much a quagmiry kind of an offense game, at least on the main field. The number 2 field may have had some bigger plays, but I wasn't over watching that. Anyway, that's it for today. We'll have more camp notes tomorrow evening. These will be coming out in the evening regularly. If there's anything you want me to look for, hit me up with a DM on Twitter or a comment on the YouTube video. DM on Twitter is probably actually better, and I'll try and keep an eye out. If you have something you'd like me to report on while we're there, I'll try and be your eyes and ears. Otherwise, keep an eye out for the other stuff. We have the Concerns series, which should be running for the next week or so, about concerns entering training camp. Take a listen to those. Go back to the Expectation series if you haven't given that a listen. And as always, DM me if you have an idea for a film study short you'd like to join me for. Think of this as an open mic, or maybe even a radio station you're calling into, except we're going to really sit down and talk for about 20 minutes about some topic in some significant depth. Doesn't have to be a fully worked out idea. In some ways, it might be better if you didn't waste your time completely working out an idea before you come to me, because I may have already had something similar on the past, so I may want you to focus down on a smaller part of it if we can do that. And it's just better if we start the conversation and I can hopefully help direct you into a topic I think would be both exciting and non-duplicative of things we've already done. This is Ken McKusick, and I'll talk to you tomorrow on Camp Notes.